So, here's an interesting way to start. These guys, I should have been briefing them over lunch, and I haven't told them, so they're getting the briefing at the same time as you, learning what's going to happen. There's a sequence of a picture from each one of these practitioners, and they get given 2 minutes and no more to summarise the entirety of what they get up to in the terms of the subject under discussion. That's your warning, everybody, that you've got 2 minutes. But what I am going to just help you very slightly is this. This morning, I hope you all concur, was extraordinarily interesting and shows just how many openings there are for inquiry in these amazing manuscripts. What also has happened over the last decades is a bunch of people going, let's get these plays off the page and let's put them on their feet in some manner or other. Now, there's a really interesting array of pics that Chloe and team have put together downstairs here. And the earliest one that we kind of think we know about was Canon Doble. It dates right back to 1924, and he also did something during the wartime, it would appear. And then there was a lady who I have no connection with, but sounds like a formidable person I'd love to meet, was Helena Charles, and she put on some stuff through the 50s. And of course the big thing that everyone knows about is that in 1969, Bristol University landed like a travelling circus and done it. And of course at that time, there was no institution labelled university in Cornwall, and one might forgive them for the lack of any Cornish input whatsoever into that production. I must of course amend that slightly, because Dave Crew's dad mowed the grass. So there was Cornish input into that production. The interesting thing about, there's a lot that's interesting about it, and there's some very interesting images. At that time, the professor of drama at Bristol was Professor Richard Southern, who within a few years was drawing pictures showing the interior of the plen crowded with people and the platforms around the outside. However, in 1969, under the direction of Neville Denny and his sidekick Sidney Higgins, who I've been lucky enough to meet and talk to about all this, they actually performed it in the way that would seem their best understanding it at that time, which was audience sat on terraces around the edge. And the truth is, when you see the images of this, it feels a little difficult with all that wide open space and not much in the way of excitement or energy taking place. And things have changed somewhat since then. I'm not going to work you all the way through the entire revival, because from the 1980s onwards, I can claim a 1988 example, which was Myrna Kembelek's translation of Bilan's Miriazic, which we performed with Kneehigh on a scratch performance in St Mary's Church in Truro. And then we're going to move a little bit forward. So here are a bunch of people who either have or who are going to get involved in reviving these plays. And I think when we listen to what they have to say, we'll be interested in why we might revive them. Is it for academic and historical interest in the Cornish language or the religious content? Is it the artistic possibilities of the form of Glengory? Or is it as a deliberate assertion of Cornish cultural identity? That's amongst the reasons we might have. Once you've decided why you want to revive them, you might then move to how you're going to revive them, and overcoming 3 small problems: how to cope with the Cornish language. Most actors can't speak it, very few of the audience can understand it. How to cope with the religious content, which is pretty much devoid of its original meaning to most of our audience today. And then how to cope with the form itself, in that most audience of the 21st century expect a proscenium brightly lit box and don't expect to be stood up and moved around on the hoof. So these are all the kind of problems we might be exploring. And what we're going to do now is hear from each of our esteemed guests, and the order in which that happens goes, and as I said, team, you get just 2 minutes to say, this is what I've done, and this is why I'm here. Got it?
Yeah.
Cool.
Got it.
It's... No. It'll help if I press the right button. Jack Morrison!
First up. Right, okay.
That's
Okay.
1 minute 50 left.
Do I stand or do I sit?
Do everything right.
Okay, so my name is Jack Morrison. I was being taught about the Ordinalia and the Gwari Mere in 1988 by Jerry Finch, who was directing these guys in Boonan's Merry Asset. So from A levels, from A levels onwards, this has been a thing that's been in my life. I, as a theatre practitioner, as a stage manager, and I worked at the Globe Theatre during the prologue season and the first 8 years. What was very interesting to me about the Ordinalia and the Gwari Mere themselves is, at the Globe, what we were trying to do is build the original hardware that looked like the original, the sort of performance spaces that you might get an audience-actor relationship with, that the plays were written for, and then to take those plays and as closely as possible try and lay them over the top and find out what you could learn, running the software on the hardware. And one of the things that even back, as Jerry was talking about even back then, was the opportunities for running Gwari Mere on the hardware were very, very limited. And that once you sort of started with that as well, I mean, to deal with any of the things that you're talking about now, is you have to go so far back up the evolutionary tree past Shakespeare that what we're talking about, the word play, and it's a linguistic problem, both in English and the thing about it, I'm sorry I missed a lot of this morning, is what did people mean by plays and playings back about 1,000 years ago? Because we are hamstrung by the idea that we're doing plays, and maybe we're not doing plays, maybe we're doing something different.
Aha! Love it, Jacko. Follow that, my lovelies. And Sue
Okay, so I've got two things that I want to talk about. One of which is the physical experience of being an actor in the space that is made by the play. And we came to this through a piece of work that I did with Kneehigh Wildworks back in 2005, which was a version of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's story, A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings. And we made a village that was the stage, and the audience was in the middle. And it was the most intense, exciting experience as a performer, and I'm informed as an audience member, to be in this space. And we've since used this form again and again. I have not yet made any of the Cornish plays myself, except the other thing I want to talk about is my partner, my dear partner, Bill Mitchell, who died in 2017. One of the last projects he was working on was a massive, epic Ordinalia. And he had a whole series of very interesting ideas about how to do this. You can see there's an exhibit of some of his work out here. One of the things he was very interested in was the story of the Rood, and his idea was that the story was being told by people who were skilled in wood. So coffin makers, boat builders, carpenters, and that because the story of the Rood threads through the Ordinalia in terms of the idea of this Adam being close to death, sending Seth up to get an elixir of life, Seth coming back with seeds of the apple tree, and then planting those in Adam's mouth, and him being buried with these seeds that then grow into these trees that then crop up as Moses' rod, as part of Noah's Ark, part of the crucifix, of course. So this idea of building this idea around the threading the Rood. But the other really wonderful idea he had was that he would work entirely in the original languages, except for Latin. And his idea was that the ordinary would be, who he cast, it was Kernow King, was going to be a narrator who would enable a contemporary audience to interpret the Cornish, not by translating it, but by giving them hints as to what was going on.
Thank you very much, Sue, and please do look at Bill's wonderful drawings. I enjoyed my conversations with Bill on the subject very much indeed. It's me! Okay, so...
It's like a weird game show.
Oh my God, I'm just freaked myself. Sue has been talking about not setting these manuscripts on their feet, but using the Plen and Gwarry form to interpret other stories. And that's what we did with Gog Magog. These guys are actually 5 students from Falmouth Uni, speakers of Maltese, Portuguese, English and Cornish. And you may be able to imagine their utter jaw-struck amazement when they discovered the earliest surviving play script from anywhere in Britain was written in the town where they were studying theatre, but it had never ever been mentioned, of course. Please see my parallel universe comment about Glasney earlier. What we actually did, I've got to check my own time, we deliberately tried to create a pop-up Plen and Gwarry. So Sue in 2002 had built a village which was a pretty permanent structure. We tried to do the same thing as a wagon train circle and surround the audience. We then kidnapped them and flew them to another planet and told them they were illegal immigrants and made them feel what it would be like to have no home and simply be seeking a bit of refuge. That's irrelevant. It's also not necessarily relevant whether we succeeded or not. We learned a lot about the form, and that was our primary interest. How do you make this special way of putting on theatre work? And that's one of the really exciting things that we've got. Look forward ahead. Beep, 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 beep. Guy, what's up?
Well, that's nice, Will. Yeah, good. Hello, my name's Guy. I'm primarily a theatre director, but like lots of us, I kind of branch out and do other things. And then in the pandemic, I'm developing an app. That's a whole other story. My connection is primarily with the Ordinalia. Don't really do a lot of the other texts at the moment, although very inspired to from some of the conversations this morning. I've done 3 versions of the Ordinalia, sort of. The first one I did in 2015, which was my graduation show from drama school. We've been given a lovely black box studio theatre with lights and lots of equipment and stage management, and I said, that's lovely, but I'd like to do it in the park at the back, please, which they were somewhat shocked at, and being in London went, yeah, but it might rain. yeah, I come from Cornwall, we're all good about that. So that was a very interactive piece, and what was really fun about it is we had, very kind of buttoned up businessmen coming up from King's Cross, joining in. They were part of the Noah's Ark scene, flailing bits of boat around and stuff, very fun. The second version that I did was in 2016, which was part of the Kenneth Heritage Festival in Penryn, and we did it as a big processional piece, so it's quite hard to count the number of people we've got on a street, but we think something like 600 people joined in with us. And again, things like the Noah's Ark scene, we actually built a 20-foot long Noah's Ark as part of that, and then paraded through Penryn while getting as many people as we could into the boat as well. Health and safety was a nightmare, no one of that. And then the third version that I did was also as part of the Kenneth Festival a year later. And we went from something like 600 people on the streets, we think, to closer to 800, possibly even 1,000 people. And we didn't just do Arrigo Mundi, which is what I'd done for my 2015 and 2016 one. We cherry-picked a few bits from all 3 of the Ordinalia plays, and that was big and cool.
Hey! And that is Bethany Lyne.
Hi, so I'm Bethany. My first link with Ordinalia, I think, was when I was 10 and I went to see the plays down in St Just. I don't remember anything about it apart from it had a big impact on me, weirdly. And I remember a lot of red, so I don't really know which one of those that was. So I then got to the last year of my degree at university. I did an English degree at Exeter, and I had to pick something to write my dissertation on. And weirdly, I remembered these plays, and I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to pick those. No one at Exeter University at that time knew what they were. My dissertation supervisor hadn't even heard of them, hadn't read them. So it made writing a dissertation on it really difficult. But lots of people in the community down here were really generous with their time, helping me write that. I structured it quite dramatically to follow the form of the Ordinalia. So my first chapter was about how they were written. My second chapter was about how English translations of it around the Victorian time took out the Cornishness of it, and how the third chapter I called The Resurrection, and how modern translations of it have put that Cornishness, and whatever that is, back in through the different ways that they've done that. So I did that. Then Guy was looking for something to do for your undergraduate ending, and I said, what about these plays, do those? And then he very kindly invited me to play the part of Eve in the first version of the Commedia. So I'm there in the street as Eve.
Well clad.
Well, what you can't see is underneath that is a bodysuit with a sort of 1970s level of pubic hair going on. Guy's got a photograph of that if you want to witness.
The fact you're still speaking to me is...
And then Jack put it on a feast leaflet, so that was great. That was all over.
That's it?
That's it. Let's end on that.
Time's up on the pubic hair note. Okay, now we're getting down to a 50-50 chance.
Yeah.
Sorry, Harvey.
Intensively telling someone to do. So I'm Simon. I'm a theatre director and writer, and I'm involved with filmmaking. And I'm interested in Cornish culture, particularly contemporary Cornish culture, and stories of all kinds. I've spent probably the best part of the last 5 years trying not to get involved with anything to do with particularly the Ordinalia, and I've been asked by several people to be involved with projects, and I resolutely, and Jack has been on to me for about 15 years to do something with them, and I kept saying, no, I'm not interested in a religious story, and I'm not interested in that. Fast forward to about 2 years ago, and I did some work for Kresen Kernow, and we knew this exhibition was coming, and should have been last year, and I was asked to do something for schools. And so, working with Jack, I ended up looking at stories from the Ordinalia, Bunyan's Quay and Bunyan's Mary Asic, and writing mini adaptations that could go to school groups who are not Cornish speakers to sort of explore that. And the thing that I got more interested in is the staging of them and the form, which Will was talking about, and Sue, and that sort of stuff. So I've written 7 mini adaptations that we put on. They were sent out to schools across Cornwall. They were put on in a plenary form, albeit indoors, at a Martyr. And then we've just redone that project with the Hall for Cornwall Youth Theatre, which was going to be performed out the back here last Saturday. Unfortunately, the weather got in the way, so we ended up in Redroof School. And yeah, that's as much as I want to say. And then the other thing I have done is a version of Noise Flood about 7 or 8 years ago in Glastonbury. And unbeknownst to me, I was sort of working in a plenary style with a cast of 500 and a 1,500 audience. So I sort of know a little bit about the staging.
Cracking. Which, last but by no means least, Jason must be...
I do.
Jason Squibb.
Yes, hello everyone, I'm Jason. There's me on the right-hand side there. Believe, brother, believe. And that's the Resurrection, 2002, I think. I went to Barnsley College in '96 and did a drama degree, a Leeds Uni drama degree. And I didn't know what to do for my dissertation. I read this book called Shakespeare's Would Know by Leslie Hopson. And from that, it got me a little bit interested. My dissertation was on the links, the connection between medieval church drama and the Elizabethan theatre. And I knew nothing about theatre when I went there. And this bit kept coming back, which was the Cornish Passion Plays or the Ordinalia. So I wrote about it, not having any clue really what I was talking about. I finished my degree in 1999, and then my friend, I live in Falmouth, and there's a row of 6 houses. Dom Nutton lived at number 2, and I lived at number 4. And we'd been childhood friends, and we got back kind of in contact with each other. And he said, do you want to come and be my assistant director on this thing called the Ordinalia? I went, I know that name, I remember that. And so I got to the chance for 4 years, 2000 to 2004, to be assistant director down at St Just. And also, whenever there was a part that needed to be filled or somebody was sick on the night, I got to stand in and play various parts. So I got to feel like what it was to be a performer. So I had 4 years of the Ordinalia, learning from Dom, who was just such a brilliant director, so good with the community and making it a right laugh. Apart from the moment where he did everything so perfectly, but then one evening in rehearsals, he got the pilot's dummy and launched it, and there was a lady taking a photo and it hit full in the face. So he wasn't popular that night. But apart from that, he nailed it, apart from that. And then I got in 2012 or 13, I got a chance to direct the Mary Asic play at Heartlands with some school groups, so that was good fun. And now I'm the artistic director, following on in Dom's brilliant footsteps for the 2021 production down in St Just.
Thank you very much, Jason, which I look forward to hearing a little bit more about. Ladies and gentlemen, what an array of human beings! I don't think, just like the manuscripts, I don't think we 7 have ever been in the same room at the same time. So, the intention will be directly to throw this open to the floor and to take questions from yourselves. But I'd like to begin with a little bit of why, before we go into a bit of how. So, why should we do this? Jacko?
Why? Okay, so apart from I go trip myself up with what are we doing, but as to why we should be doing this, we've got the Plen and Gwaries, we've got these scripts. They're not being done. For many years, the attempts to bring these two together and get it into some sort of working tradition has not been working. If this had been in London, we would all have been up there on a school trip already several times to go and witness these things. It would have been the stuff of, mass media, and it would be in films and layered within popular culture, just like Shakespeare is, for all sorts of different reasons that we could go through. It's not. And in many ways, one of the things that has saved it is the fact that the Plen and Gwaries that we've got left over have been tucked away in the, way out St Just and, on a beach road somewhere, and so they haven't been sort of like bulldozed and had stuff done with them. But the reason that we should get them out and do something with them is because they are fundamentally, it's an entire language saved within a piece of theatre. That's an astonishing thing to explore, and you can explore it as much as you like as an academic, but until you do that piece of reconstructive archaeology and get it out and just open the entire thing out as wide as you possibly can, it makes it impossible to analyse what's going on. And I think there's loads and loads and loads that we can discover as linguists, as dramatists, and as inhabitants of Cornwall from just doing them and doing them and doing them and doing them.
Thank you. And it's important that we're talking about doing it lots of times, because it doesn't mean that this is the only one. There's more than one way to shell Hamlet. By the way, this is a free-for-all, and give me eye contact if you've got something to chip in. Guy, why should we do these things?
So
don't look at me, look at them.
I think that the more I get to grips with them and think about them and learn from them and hear people talk about them who've got overwhelming amounts of knowledge, the form bit is definitely something that I get more and more interested in. And I think it's so clear that you can draw a line from what we are starting to think of how they perhaps maybe would have been originally performed. And we've talked endlessly about the feel of that. It's not the feel of a quiet, hushed theatre where the lights go down and the curtain goes up. You will say about a riot and something else you say.
I think I said it's like going to Glastonbury Festival, but there's a plot.
Lovely, great. That feel, I think you can draw the line between that feel and what we're thinking and where Cornish theatre is now. And that's so clear for Cornwall. Although I sort of slightly took the mick out of the reaction to my drama school when I was in London, they really didn't understand why I wanted to go and stand outside in a field at the back of King's Cross, rather than doing it in a proper theatre. Whereas if you have that conversation to anybody in Cornwall, I want to go and do a play in a field, they go, well, yeah, you and everybody else that's working in Cornwall, because that's what we do. So I'm really interested in the obvious, as I think it is, connection between where Cornish theatre is now and potentially where it was however many years ago.
Sue, may I ask you, why did Bill want to do? Why did he want to do the Ordinalia?
The other bit of tangential but really relevant experience that we've had was we made the Passion in Port Talbot with Michael Sheen, and we worked with the whole town. And it's given me goosebumps thinking about it. It was a mixture of fantastic theatre, ritual, community activity. It pulled the whole town together. A wonderful review from Lynn Gardner, who said she thought she had reason to believe that Port Talbot was the happiest place on earth on that day. And it was a sense of something, ownership. And so there's two things here, one of which is the stories in the Ordinalia, and the text, the granular texture of it is wonderful. It's everything. All human life is there, and things that we're still concerned about. It's not just another Bible story. But the Bible, the experience of working on the Passion did the same thing. We went, why are we telling this story? And then you start telling it, you absolutely understand why you're telling it, because it's about some absolutely fundamental questions about our relationship to each other and to spirituality and to our sense of the past and the future. So I think the key thing about the Ordinalia is it's something that we can own, and at the moment we don't. As a community, we don't own it. Every person in Cornwall should go, that's our story, that's our show. And that's the aspiration I think we should have for the future, is to build a level of critical mass around it that people go, hell, this is us.
Obergamma Kernow.
Absolutely.
Obergamma is worth 132 million euros each 10-year cycle.
And under Amagao is really pissed off. Because there was a point when, interestingly, Ober Amagao happened as a result of the plague. And they undertook to do a play every 10 years to say thank you God for saving us from the plague. Under Amagao decided it was too much effort, and now they're the ones who aren't making millions and millions and millions of dollars every year.
And everyone knows that Obergamma has the best children's playground, cinema, swimming pool, and civic facilities of anywhere in Germany. I'm waiting for somebody, not you yet, Jason, you're going last. Why should we do it in terms of Cornish culture? Bethany?
Well, that's really interesting, because the reason that I think we should do them are pretty textual. I, probably quite controversially, as a player going to see them, I think they're quite difficult as a thing to perform in the ways that we understand theatre. As that, I don't, there are probably more entertaining things you can go and see. The reason why I think we should perform them, though, because in comparison to other things that we have at the same time, the Chess of York, the things like that, these are really, really amazing. I think they're sort of like the Shakespeare of their time for us. Cornwall writing those is so, as we've heard today, just so brilliant, and Glasgow being this sort of seat of learning. So that's the reason for me is to do them, and I think and the Legend of the Rood, that being in it, that is such a interesting and unique thing, and as Sue, you've touched upon, like that Legend of the Rood pulling together these quite disparate stories in Origo Mundi, for example. So that's the reason I think we should perform them. And I think then that's the difficulty for the directors, is then how you tell that within your productions and how you pull out the really exciting things on the page to make sense to a modern audience without somebody having to write a dissertation on it to tell you why it's so good. I'm very glad I'm not a director having to direct.
So sorry, you've said that you resisted. Why did you resist? Why did you succumb? And are you a convert?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I have got interested in it, and I've got interested in it through the form, so the Plenengwari style, so the idea of surrounding an audience is exciting, and you can't really get a sense of that. And I've only done it on a relatively small scale, audiences of 100, 150, but until you sort of stage something that way, you can't quite, it's different. So you said there's the link to theatre in the round, and everyone goes, oh, they're like theatre in the round, and they're not. It's the opposite of that. You're in the round and it happens around you. And so if you're an audience member, and as a director, where it's interesting is you're throwing the focus around. So as an audience member, like if you're in a nice warm theatre, it's quite easy to start drifting off if the story goes. But if you're forced to be looking, and you can surround people and people are coming underneath you or whatever, that opens up massive possibilities. So that's interesting, and because I'm interested in Cornwall, and my understanding is that form is unique to us. As I'm sure there's been other versions of it, but the Plenengwari form and there's a direct link to our forebears in that. That's what's exciting to me. I appreciate the language, and I wish I knew more of it, and would like to get more in there. I appreciate historically their interest, but for me the form is absolutely out of the three things you listed, the one that is the most exciting.
Yeah, the three things about how, not the three things about why.
Yeah,
he says.
So can I answer? Okay. Why?
Yeah, I'm really genuinely interested, Jason. You've been sweating blood for months. Actually, no, years.
6 years.
6 years. Marianne was talking to me about the next iteration years ago, trying to pull it off. You've got hundreds of people. You've had to raise all kinds of dosh from improbable sources. Why?
For me, let's say, as an actor, I'm standing in a theatre which is still there after 600 years, saying lines, maybe not in the same language, maybe not quite they've been adapted, but somebody stood there in that theatre, and I, as an actor, that's quite a privilege to stand there and say something similar. There's also a kind of, on the continent and kind of York, Oberammergau, places like that, there's a bit of an ethos, which is the community is charged with the responsibility of keeping these plays alive. That seems to have been what I've heard a lot. And St Just is a good example of that Pleningwarry sits right in the heart of the town centre, and the community use it on a daily basis, even if that's just for sitting there and having a pasty. But when you put that play in there, something happens. There is an energy about that place where you will probably, as an actor who's worked for 20 years, we get used to, when you've got the audience in the palm of your hands. Not that happens a lot to me, but on those odd occasions when it happens. But there, it happens a lot. That energy that's flying around, because you are within that circle, is quite magical. And another why is, somebody just pointed out a moment ago, if you look at the passion plays on the continent, they're generally flat on. Oberammergau, you could be sitting way back, and to sometimes change those scenes. I saw the Paseo de Olesa at Montserrat in Spain quite a few years ago, and they have the curtains open in this huge indoor auditorium, and you're seeing, angels, and there's animals and everything, and it's an amazing spectacle. And then they have to close the curtains, a little bit of light music for 10 minutes, you sit there, the lights come up, and then the next scene. And so as an audience member, you're connecting and then disconnecting, connecting and disconnecting. And the great thing about this play, because it's in the round and it's epic, you can have a scene starting up here and another one finishing while somebody's moving across. It's continually fluid. There isn't many pieces of theatre like that. For a director and an actor and for audience, it's just magical. So that's
superb. So there's a good little collection of answers to the question, why should we do this? And quite a few of us stumbled into the how, because we couldn't resist talking about the form. And absolutely, I get that. That was the thing that got me excited. I remember back in '88 when we worked with Jerry Finch, going to Perrin Round, and I just walked into that space, and instantly I just had a feeling that I knew that it was that way round. And that's completely subjective. There was no academic basis to that whatsoever. I just went, as a theatre maker, I know how I would use this space. And that's what it felt like. And so we're all of us excited. And it so happens we have a panel of people here for whom probably the form is the most important thing. Which is interesting, given that we've spent the morning talking very much about the words and the language and the manuscript. I, of course, have very much a foot in both camps, and I've been mounting a campaign with Jason about making sure we do have some Cornish language this year. So let us move forward to the how, and I think we've probably for the minute said enough about the form. My first how question was about the language. How do you cope with the fact that this is written in a language? Do we have 300 fluent speakers, Mr. Trevethan? Do we, the numbers vary as to how many we think. So we could maybe perhaps achieve one audience worth of speakers. We certainly don't have the body of fluent actors who are able to cope with it. Therefore, is this language thing just a barrier, a problem to be overcome, or is it a creative opportunity? And I know that Sue and Bill will have something to say on that.
I think that we thought of it as a creative opportunity, and it started with an approach from Warwick University, who wanted us to do Bunan's Meriazic, because they were doing performance research where they would take original texts and put them before contemporary audiences, and then their research was in a sense interrogating what happened as a result. We were very busy at the time and decided not to do Bunan's Meriazic, but Bill got very, very excited about Gwern Zambis and the Ordinalia, and really he hadn't settled on where it was going to go. But the thing I think he got very excited about, it was built on our confidence from making work in the outdoor landscape in Cornwall. When we started working with Kneehigh, there were no theatres in Cornwall. Well, there was the City Hall, it was like a big village hall in Truro. There was the Minack. But we were playing in sports halls and village halls. And then we started to take the work outside, and we started to understand that words behave in a different way outside. They don't operate as carriers of meaning in the same way as they do when you're sitting in a comfy seat in an auditorium. And we started to experiment with different ways of using text. And one of the things we did, and actually it was the first piece of work we did in the Plen and Gwarry form, which is the image you saw when I was talking earlier, which was a very old man with enormous wings. And we made up a language. So the language was literally unintelligible to people, but we found that with performance, we could make it emotionally transparent. We found we could tell the story, but we had the text. We had text. It wasn't like we were silent. And some of the text was familiar. There were odd words that were familiar, and we found we could tell. Hands up if you saw this show. Okay, I'm describing. It's a fair description.
El Papi.
So, yeah, you knew exactly what was happening.
I understood every word.
Yeah, you understood every word. And so when the challenge came from Warwick, which was, could you do this play in the original text? And we went, oh God, that would be amazing. And how would we do it? And the thought was that we wouldn't translate it all, but we would add in levels of performance and narration which would allow people to enjoy the sound of the language. The performance of the language would be part of the music of the piece, but we weren't going to literally translate every piece, but we would make it so that a contemporary audience would completely understand what was going on. So we were very excited about it. I'm so sad it didn't happen.
I remember Phil saying to me, I want every audience member to leave thinking that they can speak Cornish.
Yeah.
Was it entirely a professional cast?
No, and the other idea was that it would be a collection in the same way as we worked in Port Talbot, actually, which was we had a professional corps of 12 people, but every other performer, and there was about 700 of them, was amateur. We had the local rugby clubs playing the pilots invading army and wearing their BBC body armour and the machine guns.
Does anyone else want to chip in on the Cornish language subject?
I think you guys did it really well.
Only just from working with communities for quite a few years, as we all have, there's taking this Ordinalia for 2021. We have people there who have never done any acting in their life, who go, I'd like to be part of it, I don't know if I'll be any good, can I have a small part, or I'll challenge myself, can I have a medium-sized part, to then get them to stand on stage in front of possibly 500 people and say something is a huge thing. For them to then translate something and still get the meaning over adds on another layer, which is quite tricky. So I think in terms of that body of people coming, there'll be some people there who'll be fluent Cornish speakers, some people will give it a go, some people speak a bit of Cornish, and you're trying to go, hey, like, if Will comes on board, only from your point of view, we want you. So Will is, we've got Will down for Doubting Thomas, and the great thing about Doubting Thomas is in the Ordinalia, generally when he says something, the other disciples come back, but Thomas, that is our belief, that he will rise from the dead. So it's like you're getting an automatic translation as you go. So the part of Doubting Thomas is an ideal one, and we get to hear a fluent Cornish speaker speaking Canoeic, which I find fantastic. However, if I gave that part to somebody who just rocked up and said, I haven't done much, it might fall flat a little bit, and they might lose confidence and never have anything to do with theatre again. So you're balancing it all the time.
If you think of it as a longer term process, we're aiming for, this is happening every 4 years, right? That we're talking that in 30 years' time.
Well, there's more Cornish in this adaptation than there was in the 2000.
Exactly. We can grow it.
Yeah, and we're growing on many fronts. And not to forget, we're also growing the audience and how they respond, how they behave, what they expect. Because you still have got people turning up expecting that proscenium march. Okay, so last chance to just chip in and
Sorry,
talk.
I interrupted, sorry.
So I don't know which script, if you're still using the Pauline Shepherd script that I've got, but
Yeah.
what I think she does beautifully in it is when they count the animals onto the ark, for example, that was in Cornish, in the version that I have. So you know as an audience member, we all know Noah's Ark. So I think if you can pop it into context, you've got a really great idea with Cousin Jack's, is that which is Guy's Theatre Company, when an audience member comes to the theatre, that you might talk to them in Cornish.
Yeah.
And you might say, can I have your ticket please in Cornish? And you know what that is because you're expecting somebody when you go to the theatre to ask for a ticket. So I think there are ways as well we can use the language, not just in the text, to build and create that world.
Yeah.
And so we're used to hearing it, and it doesn't become this quite like, sorry, what's that? I was the Lady of Cornwall at the Gorset many years ago, and I had to speak in Cornish at that, and that was the most terrifying thing I've ever had to do, was speak 8 lines of Cornish in front of a load of Cornish speakers. So I totally get your performance here. It was so
You
terrifying.
could have easily got put off and went, oh no, that's too much, I don't want to do that again. But
Jack, you've probably got something to say, but this is an extension of that question, because the masterly exposition from Dr. Ken George about the stanzaic form, for me, part of this original text, this is one of the conversations I've been having with Jason, is it's really hard just to do a line. You've got to let me do the 6. I've got to have the stanza. There's a rhythm and a syllable count and a strophic form in the rhyme pattern.
And then you get 6 lines, not 1 line.
Okay. I don't know whether that's a consideration in your approach to this stuff, Jack.
Yeah,
the language.
So one of the things that there's so much we don't know, and already you can hear us. We all do it. We'll sort of drift in this way of moving towards talking about theatre and talking about plays as if an audience. The word audience to listen, and spectators to spectate. So it's about visual and audio. And if we've got an audience, and to fulfil audience expectations, we are all drifting instinctively towards a 2-hour show with a 20-minute interval, possibly a space for a raffle in the middle, because that's what people understand. And people will turn up with their lawn chairs and with a picnic. This is what Cornish audiences understand, is what we feel. This is to build towards audience expectation. So the question is coming in a degree. I know it's a cheeky one. Why is Cornish a problem for an audience that's going to turn up with that kind of expectation? And the point is that every single time we do it, there's another little thing to unravel. So whether it's about form, or whether it's about pace, or whether it's about language, it's one of those. Each one of these things is a thing to be unravelled. The thing about the Globe Theatre is every single time, even the authentic practice, everything was just, we knew absolutely 100%, definitely they didn't do it like that. And we all know 110% that every time we do a performance, they, in that 250-year period in which the Gwarimir were happening, they didn't do it like we do it. We can't communicate that to our audience. We can't tell the audiences, you're not we're not pretending, we're not joking, we're not being something, we're not being charlatans here. We're not doing it the way that they used to. But one of the wonderful things that we can do is we can try different things. We can try the form, and the poetry of what's there, the line form, the rhythm, the pace. It's sort of astonishing because it's not been. I don't think anyone's had a proper go at that. Over and again. I was reading the English language translations. They read at about an hour and a half. Add 30%, so your playing time is sort of like just under 2 hours. They ran for an entire day. How did that in the Cornish with the line endings, with the structure? What did that sound like? That's amazing. No one's had a go at it. Is it important? Yes, it's fundamentally and profoundly important. Will an audience pay money to come and see that? Probably not. No, we probably can't.
They will. I spent 24 hours watching Ken Campbell's Illuminatus, and I would have gone back and done it all again the following night. They will if you make it good. Bill always say we go and see a show, and I would say, oh, that's half an hour too long, and he'd say, no, it's half an hour not good enough.
Ooh.
But actually, if something's compelling, I've watched the Oresteia in the National end to end, and it was brilliant, and there was not a moment where you thought, oh God, it's time for a drink. It's half an hour not good enough. It's 10 hours not good enough.
So let's move that forward now. Having had a little discussion about language, let's talk about religion.
Okay.
The point being, we now have a thing called religion which doesn't really touch our lives. And we're not saying that in the medieval times religion touched their lives. We're saying they lived inside religion. You ate with religion, you slept with religion, every activity you took part in was informed by religion. And from my reading, and Tazin Nevin, Gilweir, Formia Putra, Vith Grease, from the very opening of the very first line of the play, there's a didactic. I'm going to tell you how you ought to believe. This is orthodoxy coming at you. Now, by my reading, that then did change. And when you get to the Times of the Saints plays, I think we're getting a lot more subversive and a lot more deliberate assertion of Cornishness. But the whole thing is wrapped up in religious references, astonishingly, amongst the many things that kids growing up nowadays don't know, it's Bible stories. And that was a common inheritance. I'm 60, and when I was at primary school, you learned about Noah and you learned about blah, blah, blah. If you put this stuff in front of people today, what possible meaning, I'm looking at you now, Guy, giving you the body language, are you going to accept the offer? What possible meaning can we find in all this religious stuff that isn't really part of our lives, for many people, is not important to their lives today?
I'm going to be really disobedient and ever so slightly not answer that question.
Okay.
But it does link to it. And it's a bit about, I'm going back a bit really, talking about the how, but the how, because I think one of the stumbling points that there have been for Ordinalia and the other plays over the last so many years is a nervousness of ownership. And I think you're completely right, Sue, that Cornwall needs to have ownership of these things. But what we have to be very careful to do is not to give that ownership to one group of people or three groups of people, whatever it is. And I think the only way of us having county-wide ownership of it is for as many people to be doing it in as many ways, in schools, as the Christmas panto at Morn and Smith, as the enormous school production in Bodmin. Whatever it is, just do it. So in some ways, I think these sorts of conversations of how do you do this, who cares? Just try it, just do it, just have a go. Except that 7, 8, 9 out of 10 of them will be rubbish. Maybe one will be great, but don't hold on to this idea of we can't do it until we've got all the answers. Because one, I don't think we'll ever have all the answers. And two, we'll have even less chance of getting those answers if we haven't played with it. Because although the stuff we've talked about this morning, which has been just so fascinating, illuminating, incredible, and all the rest of it, when we learn a huge amount from the study of the text, we also learn a huge amount from doing it. And doing it, and sometimes doing it wrong. Again, well, it clearly wasn't like that, because that's just rubbish.
Interestingly enough, we tend to mention the word Omagammerhauser, they've got it all lined up and beautiful. They've been through the most extraordinary internecine warfare of factions who want to do it this way, people who want to change it that way, people who want to rid it of the anti-Semitic content, people who want to make it more gender-friendly and inclusive. And there have been really big differences of opinion, and I think that's almost inevitable. I'm now looking across at you, Si, and I'm talking about, you specifically said, I don't want to do religious stories.
Yeah. I've got nothing to add.
What is that a barrier? The fact that these plays are conceived entirely within a religious world view.
Well, I can tell you. So the little adaptations that I did were going out to schools, and I did a couple of stories about. I did the Key and Tudor in the Bath story. I did the King Arthur one, which I happen to really like. That's my favourite of all of them. I did a version of the Holy Rood, which was standalone, which was split into two parts for different schools, and a couple of Constantine ones, the Conversion and all the rest of it. And I lent into the stories that I thought were kind of the strangest in a weird sort of way. And I wanted them to be kind of anarchic, and I was looking at stuff like Horrible Histories, and I was using stanzas and turning them into raps and things that I thought that young performers would get a kick out of doing. And then I'm doing a series of workshops here at the moment, and the schools could choose the ones they wanted to do, and the one I struggled the most with was the Holy Rood story to make it work. and I wrote it all in rhyme in English with little bits of Cornish in it. And we're doing workshops here at the moment, and the same thing, they're all getting sent out to the schools and they're all choosing the Holy Rood.
Wow.
That's the one they want to do, that's the one they want to put on their feet and play around with. And to be fair, I've been fairly anarchic with them. Irreverent with them. And they like that, but they're full of big images, which is great for groups of 30 kids, for example, when you haven't got props, but you've got bodies, so you can create stuff. But it's interesting to me that, and I'm going, why aren't you doing King Arthur? That one's really good. And it's about Brexit, and it's really funny. So, but maybe it's not funny to kids.
They've gone for the weird one.
But they like the biblical story. So I'm going, well, maybe it's my hang up, you know.
Yeah.
But I think there are, you know, I think the irreverence is, going back to the earlier question, is important to them as well. And I think if you're too reverent to them, even when you're doing the biblical stories, because we know that they have the torturers and they've got fart gags and a farting dragon in St Sylvester and all the rest of it, you know, and I think those things are kind of really important to it.
There's certainly a great quote from Neville Denny back in the 60s when he's talking about that juxtaposition between high dignity and bawdy bathos, and that you can switch between these two modes very quickly. I am minded of watching Jack's son wearing a pair of dark glasses being God in your play, and I'm going to tread very carefully in this, but it's to do with the fact that for some people that's important content, and you can't just blow raspberries at it in a cheap way.
No.
I don't know, did you have something to say on that, Sue, about the religiousness of the stories?
I think it is really interesting. I reflect again on the Passion. So it was Michael Sheen's choice to do this Passion, to do the last days of Christ's life. But he flipped it by saying, okay, I'm not going to go out and be teaching people things. His role was he was called the teacher, and he was a man who'd lost his memory. So he was wandering his hometown, asking people to tell him things. So he was a listener. And the scene on the cross was he was being crucified, and his memory comes back, and he starts to remember the things that people have told him. And the image behind him, we'd been collecting home movies and photographs from the community. So there were pictures of christenings and sports days. And so this it was actually extremely emotional and also extremely funny, this image of a man who represented his community. And I suppose it's finding out what are the grains of meaning for a contemporary audience in the stories you're telling. And I think it's something like The Flood, where, again, I did a project many years ago. It was actually in the Rift Valley in Kenya, and it was a piece about. It told 7 flood stories from around the world, ancient flood stories, and these stories are so old, but they still find places to connect with us. And sometimes it is the oddness of them. And I think this thing about flood, and now our sense about sea level rising, and our anxieties about the future, and how we protect our children, and how we protect biodiversity, is all in the Flood.
That's right.
It's all there. You know, I think the thing that's difficult for us is the sort of evangelizing nature of the idea of God. Yeah. But the stories themselves are not doing that. And I think the idea of taking this, in a sense, this character. I love the idea of as we talked about this morning, those three lines in that stanza that end up with I'm in charge. Of course I'm Alpha and Omega, does character to me, and that means you've got a human being personifying God. You've not got God in the room. And so it enables you to play with your community's response to these stories and what their characters are.
Tremendous. I'm just, if anyone wanted to jump in there.
I just want to say, I was out for a dog walk the other day, and sometimes those are the moments where little bits come into me. I go, oh. And I might say this, you might think, oh my God, he's stupid, this guy. But it dawned on me that the creation story was the only story. There was no alternative for people back then. I don't think. I mean, if anybody wants to jump in. But we now have origin of species. We are a bit aware of Buddhism and what might be going on in Jewish communities, or chatting with somebody who's from a Muslim community, and you have different points of reference. Back then, I think it was only that story. you were either pagan and believed, I don't know what you believed, but that was the story. That was the story that was told to you on a daily basis. Because like you say, community and religion were so interconnected, there was no difference. It was part of your daily ritual of life. Which is why where Jesus, it took me many years Jesus says something like, if you're going to follow me, you need to hate your mother and father. And I was like, I get on really well with my mum and dad. Why would I do that? And then I realised one day what I thought he meant was, if you're going to come and follow this Christian tradition, you're part of the Jewish world, and your mum and dad are going to kick you out. It's like walking into Orthodox Jew dressed as a hippie. It's not going to happen. So that's what he's saying. So I think there was only this way of looking at the world, in that God created the world in 7 days. Yeah, of course he did. That would be the thinking, because what other story was there?
But what's the relevance for today?
Well, I think there's two ways for these plays. There's either you are a practicing Christian and it's your story and it's what you believe, but I think also it's how our ancestors interpreted the world. And I find that equally fascinating, going, people thought this story that God must have created the world like this, or the flood, or Adam and Eve, and we came, which is, if you lived in a little tribe in Africa, and the next tribe was 100 miles away, or just a couple of mountains away, you're going to come up with your own story. And of course, it's as you see your tribe get bigger, it must be that you started from a man and a woman. So I think it's just about, for me, I find it fascinating telling these stories, because it is how our ancestors made sense of the world, and it was the story they had.
Thank you. So I think that at that juncture, having asked you two very simple questions, why and how, we should see whether we have some questions from the floor, and if that's just triggered any little bit of thinking. I can see Michelle waving at me. I knew Michelle would come in first. Good maid. Come on. You may lower your mask. And Michelle, same as this morning, I will attempt to summarise your question as a little repeat for the camera.
Good luck. Okay, first thing, the medievals, unlike us, they don't separate sacred and profane, if you say, Jason, yeah? And what they're schooled in also is multivalence, yeah? There's a literal meaning of the thing, but there's also the layers of the onion, and you strip them away to get deeper into the heart of the meaning, yeah? So you don't just watch a film for the action, you don't just watch it for the love story, because it's all about Jean-Paul Sartre and philosophy and blah, 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 and you can deconstruct it at whatever level of readership you're on, okay? So there's that level. Second is don't confuse religiosity with spirituality and belief and social adherence to belief. And if you're asking me about why does the biblical narrative endure for not just 2,000 but 3,000 years and longer, is because all human life is there. And in terms of how you actually wrap up big things like long time in picture poems, most scientists today will actually say, if you look at the 7 days of creation and unpack them in long time, that's not actually a bad way of doing it. If you look at Europa as now the common DNA genetic female ancestor of, there's stuff there. There would always have been medievals who didn't buy it. Bede didn't buy, the 7 days creation, this narrative, for heaven's sake. Yeah? So don't take an Aunt Sally two-dimensionality of it. If you want to know how it's relevant for now, creation care. Yeah? Don't eat people, i.e. people being other animals. It's wrong. Yeah? Take care of the vineyard that you find yourselves in, or you're going to screw it up. Okay? Human empathy, the passion, etc. What does it mean to be truly countercultural? To be truly radical? To truly have a voice and a passion for social justice? To truly recognise the divine in every person and every living thing, and to actually lay down yourself in its service? What does it mean to create your own heaven and your own hell here, now? All of these things are in there. Yeah? If you want to stop at a two-dimensional, this is what people oppressed by the church in the Middle Ages thought, fine, leave it at that. If you want to really get to the nub of the flavour of the onion, go for it. I saw a production the other day in Henley Little Theatre, open air, in the rain, with David Min doing a wonderful
I saw it too.
That's directed by
Pocket Candy Tale.
Yeah.
And how he get around the problem of the language thing there? Well, he appeared as a figure with a hood on, and he muttered the first 4 minutes in Middle English. Yeah? And everybody's going, oh shit, where's the exit? But actually, they, you know, the rhythm, the stanzas, etc. And then when he threw the hood back, he said, right, now then. And then
his storytelling.
3 brothers and 3 pewter tankards, and you're totally in character, etc. That was another way of doing it. Give them the surprise, let the ordinary come out and start having a go at them in Cornish and pushing them about and telling them where they're supposed to be as an audience before we then go into it.
Can I just jump in there?
So I directed that show.
And wrote half of it.
I wrote half of it.
That was my idea at the beginning as well.
That's really good.
But what you're talking about there is those stories, we consciously adapted them to try and bring out those themes much more. So I think maybe that's something that we need to not be too reverential with what is there, and accept that the form that they're in is for the form that they were designed for at that time, and we need to find different ways of doing that, which I know St Just is doing. Is definitely what I am interested in, but finding those parallels and then adapting them so you can get those, and that's what Sue and Bill were talking about doing as well. But I think I agree with you. I don't think there's any point personally in trying to follow the stage directions that we're given in Latin or Cornish or whichever version of them, to put them on as a heritage thing for how they were done 600 years ago. We're too cine literate, story literate, not, you know, we read novels now, you know, we consume stories in a completely different way now, and our brains are, you know, we just do, that's how, so we have to adapt to that and the form again I think really lends itself to that because it is truly immersive. Anyway, that's
Not sure it was a question there, Michelle. Thank you very much. Much appreciate your contribution.
I mean, I guess it's, you know, we've got some amazing academics in the room, and we've got theatre makers, and what we're trying to do is get to that point where what do we I've never been in a room with other people interested in the Ordinalia. or I've read it in a book, and I can't ask a book the question that I want. So this is where we're finally getting to go. You know, I might say something, no, that's not true. Okay, tell me more. That's what, because I know it's a lot of the things I think are wrong, and it's trying to find out what is right, and that's what I find fascinating about today.
Dr. Ken George.
I have a question, but you'll forgive me making a few comments first.
Of course, that's the protocol.
I was interested in what you said about the problem of the language. I remember going to Ordinalia in St Just, I forget which one, it must have been before 2006. From the point of view of the audience, most of them don't know Cornish. Well, how many of the audience at Oberammergau actually understand German? And how many understand 17th century German, which is essentially what the text is? But they may know the story, which is another problem with if they're not that religious. But what your discussion illuminated to me was that there were two sides to the problem. One was the possibility of people not understanding. But the other problem was, can you find enough actors who are sufficiently au fait with Cornish to put it over? I hadn't really thought about them so much. But what I noticed when I was at the St Just performance, went there deploring the fact, of course, that it was going to be done in English. But what I found was listening to it and half knowing the text in the Ordinalia it was just like listening to a program with subtitles. Yeah. I was listening to it in English and hearing it in Cornish.
Wow,
the translation was good. It was close to the Cornish, and I could actually hear the Cornish lines in my head, which was interesting. Yeah. But what did help there was having a narrator. Yeah. Something which doesn't actually occur in the original Ordinalia. But when coming to the question of lost plays, somebody mentioned this morning that there might have been a lost play on the childhood of Christ, because at the end of Origo Mundi there's a mention of childhood, which is what caused me to write the fourth Ordinalia play, Juventus Christi. And when I was writing that full-length Ordinalia play, I thought I really liked a narrator at St. Just, so I put a narrator in the play. So my question is, coming to a question,
Yeah.
Are you going to have a narrator in the play this year?
Okay, well, seated here are a bunch of people who have done versions. A person who's in the very middle of literally just finished it, and then we've got the person at the end who's about to direct the St. Just this year. So briefly from you, sorry, beforehand, narrator or no?
I plumped to have narrators in mind, but I they were a chorus. So I had a chorus, and that's useful when working with young people because you want as many speaking parts, and there aren't that many places for lots of people. So choruses are really handy, and they're also really handy for outside to get volume and all the rest of it. So yes, I did. And then I should just say, we spent quite a long time last year working on another version that didn't end up happening, which was going to happen here. And we were really looking at trying to find a way in. And one of the concept that we came up with was that people were going to be attending a lecture about the texts, a bit like we've been at today. And then they were going to end up getting stolen as part of it, but we didn't realise that there was the tension. So we came up with this idea. We thought this is going to be great, and they get stolen, and then they end up acting them out. And so but we were going to have a narrator of sorts in that. But Kresen Kernow said, "No, you can't do that." Yeah. But and in that one we were going to get around the language by having audio description in Cornish and English depending on what they were speaking. So it's almost like live subtitles were going to be in the room. Was the
Jason, narrator or no?
We've got the ordinary character back again, which is Mary Ann. In fact, she was the only person who wasn't cast because everybody was too scared to tell her that she wasn't doing it. So, so Mary Ann is the ordinary, and really she's just saying those stage directions like "and here Pilate shall parade," probably the Latin stage directions. So that's a continuation from 2000 to 2004. But I found it interesting that I didn't know about the actor that you think created an oral account of the creation of the world. Because I'm guessing that in medieval times you couldn't rock up for a rehearsal because you were tied to the feudal system in the main. So you couldn't go to your lord and lady and go, "Could I have the night off for a Thursday rehearsal?" So you could only turn up on the day as a religious ceremony, and either the ordinary does whisper those lines in your ears because you are generally illiterate in a lot of those performers, I'm guessing, or there is the other option of learning lines through an oral tradition, which we don't do as actors anymore. We get a piece of paper and we read it and we learn lines, and so I don't know what that would be like. But I'm guessing that it can only be those two forms, unless anybody else thinks otherwise. And in that case, if you are whispered, your lines are whispered in your ear by the ordinary, you couldn't have God up in heaven and Lucifer here having a barrage, because you'd have the ordinary sprinting backwards and forwards.
Yeah, we were talking about this at lunchtime. We don't buy this idea of whispering lines.
But could they do that by meeting in the central playing space and then being there?
It may be there are people here today, and perhaps who might be watching this later, who have missed a trick here. What? Whisper in the ear, whisper in the ear? Is there anybody here who is a supporter of the ordinary whispers in the air theme? Jack, explain to the good folk where the origin of this notion is and what we're talking about.
Well, okay, so as I talk with so many people in the room who knows better than I, but there's, as Jason's alluded to, there's one text, it's one book. We've got a copy of it upstairs. There's a lot of people in the company. Not everybody gets their own handwritten book. Not everybody could read their own handwritten book. How do the parts get distributed? The playing time is over a day. in our show, is it such that this is the cast and I have the book and I would whisper the line to Beth and Beth would stand forward and say it loudly to you, and then I would go to Guy and whisper the line to Guy and Guy would give the next line, and the book has the stage directions in it, and is that how we get through this? That's the idea of the Whispering Ordinary, is that they have the book.
And the evidence for that? Well, you've got Carew in 1602 explicitly saying that was how it was done, and then you've got the miniature Saint Martin of Saint Apollonia and a couple of other medieval pics that do appear to have a person with a stick and a book on stage organising stuff. Is that convincing?
There's also Carew's is writing a gag. It's not just a piece of narration, and it's not and he's writing considerably later. He's like, the whole thing of the ordinary whispering lines to an actor who is deliberately misinterpreting what the guy is saying. Say, stand forward, and the actor says, stand forward. No, you mar the play. No, you mar the play. Which again is sort of alluded to in other Shakespeare, Elizabethan plays later on. It's a gag, and it carries on, and you can find it, and it's still being played out today on TV.
And Professor Gordon Kipling points out that when you analyse the style of language in Carew, you can tell when he's talking about something he's seen with his own eyes and when he's doing a bit of hearsay. And this bit definitely falls into kind of whiffle-waffle hearsay.
Yeah. What I'm going to step back on, though, is to say the reason I half put my hand up is because it's over 200 years of history.
Yeah.
That we do know that there are references to professional performers being in there somehow, or there being an exchange of money for people.
Yeah.
We do so it is okay to, and there are characters who seem to be written in a similar style. So you might say that try and get it right. Augustine, and there's a couple of the where some of the repetition hints at particular style of performance, which might in the future lead us to examine whether a similar actor was being given those roles and the other roles were being given to other people. So the tyrant roles come out as very, very similar sort of personality traits and written in a very similar way. Mm. So either the author is writing because that's how they write, or they're writing for specific people who do that very, very well. So my thing about the ordinary, to go back to the ordinary, is I think that in Boonan's Key, when all the knights are coming on stage, it is implied there are hundreds of people. There are dozens of named characters. The ordinary is very definitely useful in that moment in getting them all on and off stage. So I sort of do by the ringmaster reference that they put her in a ringmaster's outfit with a big stick with a glitter ball on the end, because the ringmaster I see them much more as that, and I do think they slipped up behind people and whispered lines when it was necessary.
I wasn't
saying that they're doing this only if you've got your lines like prompt.
But I also wouldn't put out that there was a time when actually, because people were worried that they might get excommunicated if they actually spoke the word of God or Satan, that having those words encapsulated in a text and being read to you so that you're repeating something that somebody else has read wouldn't be a safer way of doing it. And I don't think we've explored that fully either, because if a playing style is over 8 hours and you're worried about being excommunicated if you're playing Judas, then
Well, also you are praying, you are incanting, you're invoking throughout that performance, and it's quite a powerful thing for an actor. And it's also a responsibility if you've got somebody playing Jesus. It's not just like a great part. It's like you're going to go through some stuff here. I don't know if Michael experienced that.
Yeah, very much
so and you're going to be playing God, and until certainly in modern times, you couldn't do some of these things. You couldn't portray Jesus on stage. You needed to have a bit of a step back.
Certainly, there are various references later on, post-Reformation, that make it really clear that it is absolutely unacceptable for an actor to portray Jesus. Yeah. It is unacceptable for an actor to portray God or Satan, and that's part of the repression. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did anyone else want to come in about the role of the ordinary?
Well, what I think is great about your version is that it's very, when you're an audience member, the community of St. Just putting on this performance. So I think in that way, the ordinary works brilliantly, and actually the script that I've got, and I don't know if it's the same one you're using, so I'm saying this and where it might not be in your production, there's some really funny stuff with like the Camborne maid and her being like, just get on the stage, come on. And I do a lot of amateur theatre, and that speaks to me highly, you know, that I can really see that. The version that we did excerpts within sort of a town street theatre space. There was no space in there for a narrator at all. Like, it wouldn't have worked. So I think I think it's half about the framing, and Simon, you said that the adaptation of the way that you're doing it, and how, whether or not you kind of need that narrator role to kind of help the audience through or not.
Cool. Sue, do you disagree with the kind of whispering in the ear?
I think the bounce and speed and pace and energy of the text, you think, you'd so mess it up if you had to do a line and then somebody repeat it and do it again. It just feels like it feels. I spend quite a lot of time at the moment working on Zoom with China and everything in translation, and feeling your kind of essential life force bleeding out of you in the translation. The idea of every line being doubled just feels like a nonsense in terms of the text we've got, which is so rhythmic and full of energy and bounce. And
which is probably why it's written, the rhymes. As we know, I write in rhyme quite a lot, because it means you sort of do 50% of the actor's work. Well, if they remember the first one, they know what the end of the second one has to sound like at the very least.
It's much easier to learn rhymes than anything else.
So if you were illiterate, how would you think people go about learning?
You learn it by rote.
By oral tradition?
I've actually... Wildworks and Kneehigh do work all over Europe, and I've learnt whole lumps of text in Maltese.
Yeah.
Because
did you read that?
No, I was taught. I had a text, but actually it doesn't make any sense. Yeah. You have to hear it. Yeah. So I learnt it by being taught.
And do the academics here think that would have been the same as well?
That's what Michelle, Oliver had his hand up first.
Well, to paraphrase your husband, if you had that system of whispering the line and say, it wouldn't be half an hour, it'd be 3 hours, not good enough.
Exactly. Exactly.
And Gordon Kipling, just to put the nail in the coffin, Gordon Kipling has shown that each of those famous images that appear to show were actually attempted graphic depictions of thingamy of what's it? Gone. Of classical Roman theatre. That they were deliberately attempts to show what they believed was the practice in Roman times, not actually meant to be medieval depictions.
It's what Jack said, it was a joke.
Yeah. Michelle!
Yeah, just to say what I was saying about mnemonics earlier, there's a distinction between silent reading and there's a distinction between public reading and public performance, right the way through literacy, And so you would always have used the oral rhetoric and the oral mnemonics
to remember
for
to learn.
Performative delivery, whether that's in an academic, a church, or a theatre context, is how they kind of structured it. And I think in terms of the role of the ordinary, etc., even from the examples I talked about this morning, there are different models there. There's the end town, where you've got the concept of professional troupes of players who are going from town to town producing, with a director that's part of their key. And then you've got the York and Chester and Clerkenwell models, where you've got plays parcelled out to trade-specific guild groups who practice it in their guild get-togethers, ready for coming together as a collective performance cycle. And I think, Jason, I don't think the people actually asking the Lord of the Manor for the day off are going to get anything more than the crowd scenes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think one of the reasons why it flourishes so much from the late 14th century onwards is because of this drift from the rural environment more into towns, into specialist trades and crafts, where essentially you're either self-employed or you're part of the family business or you're an apprentice, etc. And I think the interface between small towns, larger villages, and the agricultural hinterland for the audience and for the crowd scenes is something we've got to bear in mind there.
So do you think then that those mansions are almost like the pageant wagons of York? So Solomon's mansion, for instance, that might be a family tradition and they always do perform as Solomon, and that's how it's passed on.
Trade group if you were in York or Chester.
Do you think that's the same here as in?
I don't know, it's difficult to. You've got to think, and we've got to research a bit more what our urban, rural matrix and models were. We're not a replication of York or Chester, etc. So bit more wood.
So, as you know, I'm forever saying, can we stop concentrating on York and Chester all the time? There's 120 plays in Brittany that we haven't looked at yet, you know, and there's all these other directions to look than up that line.
Yeah.
Having said which, I did read an interesting suggestion because, as you know, the method of staging in York and Chester has been greatly debated and played with and explored. And somebody suggested that come the end of the day, all those wagons formed a circle and surrounded the audience. In other words, created a pop-up planetarium.
Yeah.
Possible.
It is
Possible. I'm scanning the floor. Is that Loenna waving? Loenna, you may demask.
I was just going to say, with what we would say text and things in Gaelic Scotland, whilst it's text these days, you don't talk about it being written, it was composed, it wasn't written down on the paper. So whilst we've got it on the paper, that's for us, that's for those who wrote it. You know, as we said, most of them wouldn't be able to read, but I still remember Mama's plays when I was 7 that we did one year. I remember some of the text. It wasn't my part, but I remember it, and then we did it 2 years, and then the next time we did it, you know, so if you are talking about it in communities and you've got it, you know, coming on several years, or your parent did a part or something, that's in there, you know, and it's not a written thing, it's composed, it's, you know, it's oral.
Yeah.
So I think, looking at other...
Absolutely. I think you'll find people are very amenable to that notion that the act of creation is not the same as the act of writing it down. Those are two distinctive and separate parts of the process.
But also Michelle's comment this morning about our lazy memories, that we're not exercising that muscle because, you know, one Google mouse click and we've got all the information we need.
Absolutely.
Whereas, you know, 100, 200, 300 years ago, people's memories would be much more exercised because if you wanted to entertain each other with an epic poem of an evening, you had to have learnt it, you had to know it, not read it. So I think this idea of an exercised memory, meaning that it was much more feasible that people would be good at it and also retain it.
Can I just ask those mums? Again, it looks like for stanzas, God would probably be the most important person in the community, and you'd go down doing those mummers plays. You know, a little bit like amateur dramatics now. It's quite political. Would the most important person in the community be that person at the top, or?
I don't know. I haven't, most of my research into the Ordinalia was looking at structures and built structures and cardinal directions and staging of it.
Yeah.
I don't know that.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Here's the thing. To what extent does this corpus of material assert a deliberately Cornish and/or subversive identity? Are the plays Cornish? Are the plays subversive?
Wow.
He says, you all know I have an opinion. Come on.
Go on then, you say it then.
Okay, so there's a really lovely little reference to the names of dogs at one point, and I thought that's really weird. Why are they naming the dogs? And one Google click away, and the dogs are the names of characters involved with the siege of St Michael's Mount.
Wow.
And there's a whole rather embarrassing siege in which people are besieged on St Michael's Mount and are paying the besiegers to give them food. So there's this whole sort of like, you know, it's essentially just extorting money out of them, and then it transpires that, you know, people are coming ashore, and actually it's a very sort of like baggy sort of siege. Anyway, certain members of those characters are the names of the hounds. So in one of the hunts, he says, "My name's the dogs are Talbot." And
Is this
something.
Spinner's Cave?
I want to say it's Key.
Do we recognise this reference?
Don't get named if it's Morrison.
It's Mary Asset.
Mary
Okay.
Asset.
I haven't
Okay.
got St Michael's Mount.
Well, this is
Earl of Essex.
you're getting now. You see, I'll just get Google out, and I'll. No, I just saw the names of the dogs,
Yeah,
and so
low, it swallows a spoon and that sort of thing.
yeah, and so, the references to from a few years before. Many of those names appear in the siege of a siege of St Michael's Mount.
Wow.
So this is one of those things that like absolutely completely within. So in my interpretation of that was, oh, that's interesting. Completely within Cornish, completely within the immediate history of the last sort of like 20, 30 years, and subversive because everybody would have got the like a spitting image reference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so yes.
We've got
So
the gag.
I mean, which brings us, of course, to the Tudor reference, and as Oliver quite correctly points out, Tudor had been the name of the baddie in the saints' lives going back hundreds of years. And in that spirit, everybody, I'm going to tell you, I've just written a short play in which the main character is called Boris. But I don't mean that one, I mean another one. The point I'm making is, surely you're playing this to a bunch of people and you're using the name of the monarch on the English throne.
Yeah.
Yes, you're legitimately allowed to say this is some photo, but surely the audience would have got the reference. Is that not the case?
Well, I just want to throw something out there, and I'm hoping someone else picks this up. I'm from St Kevin, which is obviously the seat of rebellion, and we've actually traced our family tree back to that point, and we were still in St Kevin, so I'm hoping some of my ancestors rebelled. There's also a playing place in St Kevin, Laden Bean, there's two, which you identify in your book, but when I read it I got very excited. And there was also monks from a monastery there. I think something's got to be happening there, that there's a playing place, there's some monks, and there's a rebellion. And I wonder if there is something there around. We don't have one of these plays, but maybe there was something happening in that playing place which made Angoth rise up, because it's right on the edge, in the middle of nowhere. Why would he lead a rebellion? So I am not an academic, but if anybody here who's super clever wants to or knows any more about that, I would be really interested in that.
With
The life of St.
Going to say,
Yeah,
any
I
luck,
think
that's
that's
the next one that
something.
turns up in a Welsh
Yeah,
cupboard.
or in
Britain.
the back of my mum's kitchen, maybe it's in
Yeah.
there somewhere.
Yeah. So I asked the question this morning about missing plays, and we've got this Ordinalia, which to me feels very much about enforcing religious orthodoxy. And then we have Greens and Bees, which is really interestingly dated by Ken's logic to be during the Marian Catholic window. But then you've got these two saints plays, and in one you have the whole scene where the Duke of Cornwall says, I am the true lord of this land, from the Tamer to the land's end, and you have no right in this country. And he's speaking to Tudor. And in the other one, we have this huge Arthurian passage, which absolutely is cribbed out of Geoffrey of Monmouth. But what was the motivation of that? Why were the writers choosing to associate themselves with Arthurian myth? There must have been some kind of motivation underlying that. So, of course, I'm answering my own question here.
Is it more a common story told throughout the British Isles anyway? Wasn't it?
Which
Arthur.
Not just Britain, it travelled everywhere.
Yeah.
But he's referred to as Arthur Kernow.
Yeah.
In other words, I am Arthur of
The
Cornwall,
Cornish.
the Cornishman. Yes, Oliver.
There's another thing, which was that Arthur was specifically associated with Key parish 300 years before Bunet's Cave was written.
Wow.
Expound, sir.
In Birrell's Romance of Tristan. He makes them, and uniquely among the medieval Tristan stories, this was written in French or Anglo-French, he made, Isolde had to swear the oath that she'd been faithful to King Mark, which placed her in a quandary, and it was done by having Arthur and all his knights come to Key parish.
Of course. Malpass.
Malpass.
To witness the oath.
Yeah.
So there's something very weird going on there, so I begin to understand of what is it about Arthur and Key parish.
Very interesting. We in a way have missed a moment here today where we ought to at least have acknowledged that in all this discussion about contemporary work, we haven't paid our tribute to the 40 years of Kneehigh. And I think really one of my peak moments in theatre was being in the audience in Restormal Castle, watching Tristan and Isolde and Kneehigh's version thereof. Because in my estimation, Berol very likely worked for the Earl, and it could well have been in that very castle that he penned that piece,
Wow.
because you're looking at Lantian, and all my knowledge on that is based entirely on your work, Oliver. Yeah. So, sorry, you were about to say, Jason.
No, I don't know.
You are.
I've gone into many things now.
I interrupted you. Okay. So it looks as though we have consensus that these plays are intrinsically subversive.
Yeah. See, there's a thing, just to bring to the Arthurian again, which is the thing we were talking about, which is about Rome and Christianity and, you know, who was writing these things and what was going on. It's subversive not only sort of across the border to looking towards London, but it's also subversive in looking, looking towards Rome and Christianity. And there's quite a lot of fizziness in there about who the authority figures are and who's being knocked and who's being sort of like shunted.
So one of our greatly loved and greatly missed playwrights was Nick Dark, and one of the aspects of Nick's work I loved was the insane international references that suddenly got dropped in to an extraordinary parochial story.
Yeah.
So you would be in this tiny little world in a village in a parish, and they're talking about China or
Basra.
Yeah.
Salathiel Trananigan drops Basra into a conversation.
Absolutely. And Bulawayo.
Bulawayo.
You know. So and actually these plays do that. They go, this is our parish, Key, but you know that Key came from Brittany, and this is what happened to him over there, and this is how he came to be here. And for me, I love that way that they locate and help us. They remind us who we are in this place, which is special, but don't forget, we're joined to the world. And I love that expansiveness about them as well. Crikey, that was dangerously,
that feels like the end of the day.
Dangerously close to a concluding statement, wasn't it? All right. Do we get extra cream tea if we finish slightly early, Chloe? Is there anyone in the room who's going, please don't finish 10 minutes early because I still need to know about...
You mentioned cream tea, that's it. People have got jam, cream jam going in their head.
I don't know about you lot, but I have had an absolute ball of a day. I've really enjoyed this from the get-go and all the way through. It's been absolutely cracking. Of course, it's massively sad that there aren't hordes and hordes of people here. Let's hope that Chloe's team and the 3S team do an extraordinary job of editing this and turning our gibbering into something that anyone else might actually want to switch on and watch and sit through. You never know. At some point this will go out. If by some chance you still have not actually been up and worked your way around the exhibition, please make sure you do. Let us once again remember what an important milestone in the rediscovery of Cornish confidence and the rebuilding of Cornish institutions and organisations this building and its organisation represent. Let's continue to build a discourse around this extremely important material, and let's try and make sure we are including all those we've referred to today but who aren't in the room. And no, I don't know exactly what either the institution, the publication, whatever it is that holds that, but we know we need it. And although I've said I'm concluding, I'm actually conscious that we've got a big event coming up. And I just wondered if very briefly people might anybody on the panel, and you don't all have to say something, and it's about the future. What is it we need to do now? Where do we need to go next? Are you going to do this every 4 years?
We would like to do the trilogy every 3 years, but you know, it's such an enormous undertaking. And the whole idea behind this was for some longevity and community ownership, so that although we might have a professional production team, we're trying to hand over, so some of our assistants are from the community, assistant producers, that, you know, so we go, here it is, if you want it, we've given you Here's scripts, here's costumes, here's music, here's set. You can take ownership of this if you want, and you can do that yourselves. And we will take a step back and we will mentor you and support you to deliver that. But it is a huge undertaking to do it. I think, over the years it will become easier and easier. My worry is that if a community needs to take ownership of it, not a group of people, if that makes sense, because then it becomes mine, and you can't do it if we're going to do it that way. It needs to be adapted every few years. A lady I spoke to about a year ago, she said, "Why are you doing this again? We've done it." I was like, because some people haven't, and there's a new generation coming through, and they should have the opportunity to explore these wonderful plays.
Jason? Beep, 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 beep.
Beep, beep, beep.
Sorry, future.
I think I will definitely do some more stuff within the form. The little scripts that I've written will happen again, and I'm happy for schools or young people's groups to take them on and do it as an entry level in, as a sort of first way in. So yeah, I think there will be more opportunities.
Bethany, the future.
I really want to see a Dave Min one-man version in a village hall.
We have talked about doing it.
The version that we know, or that we've seen, is a big community, massive production over a month in St Just. And I really think we need to see the inverse, just Dave or somebody on stage in your village hall, for us to understand that this play can be everything. You can do, it will hold up. You can do whatever you want to it. And then once we do that, I think the ownership and it being everywhere, that will start to happen.
Superb. Guy, future.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly sort of following on from what you've said, Beth, really. I think the future is all about getting it out there and doing it as many ways as we can, with hundreds of people, one person, school groups, Amdram groups, everybody. And I think it's really important that all of us and everyone who's here, the Ordinalia and the nerds, as we all are in this room, we get behind anything that happens. And then we talk about it afterwards. And then we go, yeah, no, that's not quite right, is it? But let's all get behind anything that happens.
Cracking. You may have noticed I'm doing this in reverse order, so I'm next. On my recent talk that I did online for Chloe, I publicly declared that the only thing really left on my bucket list is to build our new playing place. In other words, we know what they look like, we know how they should be. Dear old St Just is a bit knackered up. It isn't quite right in terms of heights and depths and width. Piran Round is an ancient monument, and you can't go setting fire to it and digging new devil springs in it. So we need to build one, and once we build one, that can become our calendar venue for all kinds of array of cultural goodies. That's my future.
You've stolen my one.
No!
No, because we talked about it together.
Okay,
didn't we?
Yes, we did. Yeah.
We did.
Yes.
So yeah, building new. We've got a beautiful. It's an irony, isn't it? We've got Cornwall has muscular strength in outdoor theatre.
Yeah.
We've got companies everywhere making fabulous work outdoors, but we have the men out. We don't have a space that actually responds to their work. We have a beautiful new built theatre in Cornwall Playhouse, but we don't have our outdoor playing place. So yeah, I'm with you. Let's build one.
You haven't said whether the work that Bill did will yet have a manifestation in the real world.
I think that would be amazing. It's a great sadness to me that his vision didn't get realised, and the idea of him, in a sense, scooping up the energies of everybody here, because he was the person who could do it. I don't know who would do it now, sure. But he was the person who was able to say to Rogue, come and do this bit, Jason, to actually really scoop everybody into that space and make the epic, 3-day, 3-week thing that would have been the full-on
Which
works.
means that
our
final word goes to Jack Morrison.
Right, okay.
Come on.
What would I like to see? I'd like to see, so what's next and what's the future? There are lots of questions and there's lots of explaining that has to happen, and there's lots of stuff that we're all learning, and I'm learning really, really fast. More of these, and would like every time we get the plays up on their feet and do something with them, and every time we take another bite of the apple, we learn a little bit more and a little bit more.
Reflective practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Reconstructive archaeology, reflective practice, all this stuff. But just getting on its feet and playing, getting out there, creating some playing places, whether that's in here, whether it's out there, whether it's physical or in our minds, and playing and playing and playing and bouncing back off the ideas that people have been, bringing together all the ideas and the performance. That's
See what you've done, Chloe? You didn't just build a building. Kenza and Duetha.
Sorry, as an academic rather than anything to do with theatre, the one thing none of you mentioned about the future of these plays was doing them in Cornish.
Excuse me, I did.
Yeah. Absolutely no doubt whatsoever. No doubt whatsoever, Kenza. That's absolutely part of the plan. So, Chloe, thank you very much indeed for. I'm now making it sound like you personally built the building with trowel in hand, but for the work you've done in convening the exhibition and the day today. Huge thanks to Professor Michelle Brown, to Dr. Oliver Paddow and to Dr. Ken George this morning. Huge thanks to the panel here today. And if there is anyone else I forgot to thank you, my excuse is I've never done this before.
The cafe.
So, the cafe! Right, ladies and gentlemen, I hereby declare it's time to go and find out all about Michelle's brand new book, and you are going to sign my copy, Michelle. Thank you very much indeed for being here. It was a pleasure.